Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to our favourite part of the week.
Stories, discussion, and a high likelihood of gratuitous obscenities, all in the service of a bibliomancer. This is the Tiny Bookcase.
Regular listeners will know how it works, but for newcomers, Nico and I have both written a story to the same shared prompt.
We're about to share those stories with each other, and you, for the first time. Then we'll workshop them on mic. The prompt for this episode is The Edge, and you, Ben, are going first.
The Edge. Scribe fidgeted with the device in his pocket. He had stolen it from the computer's altar on his first day as the library's new scribe, and kept it with him ever since. It was small, no larger than his thumb, and bore a ring of metal at one end which clacked against the casing as he fiddled with it. He knew the risks of being caught with it by Reader, who, during his consecration of the computer's files, always checked the forbidden recycle bin for activity. The thumb drive was, therefore, a heretical device. Reader, however, along with the rest of the town, was distracted by last month's rediscovery, the rules and regulations of football, which Scribe had diligently copied, had led to teams forming from the different groups of people who made up the sizable population of the town. Rivalries built on existing tensions had sprung up, and the competitions had grown fierce. Reader, ever the vitriolic spectator, switched his allegiances with every loss, and would often simply leave a match early to avoid the humiliation of having cheered for the losing side. It made him an unpredictable overseer for Scribe, who preferred the peace that came with Reader's absence from the library. The library was housed in an old pool complex on the outskirts of the town. Whoever had built it before the flood had clearly possessed foresight. They had installed panels on the roof which converted sunlight into electricity. A rope-like cable had been slung from those solar batteries and snaked across the floor to drop down into the dry pool, where it connected to the back of the computer. The computer itself was ancient and the last of its kind. It was the heart of the library, and Scribe's task was to extract the forgotten knowledge of the world before the flood from its archives. Stacks of hardware crowded the altar it occupied. Those components were the remaining bounty from sunken Denver, once brought in by scavenging edge divers, when desire yet remained in the town to attempt to build more computers. That profession had died off after what had happened in 95. Now, every single person left in their small corner of habitable land clung to the tenuous hope that the library might yet make a discovery to rebuild humanity, as the edge of the world drew ever closer to their homes. The screen before him flickered, and bending bands of interference swept across the cross-hatching of dead lines on the screen. Scribe tensed, feeling his shirt cling to the sweat on his back. He had been a child during the great crash of 95, but he remembered the fear he'd felt during the resulting blue screen riots. The illiterates had rebelled and looted half the town. The library itself had nearly been burned down, and that would have been the end of nearly 6,000 years of humanity. The case had not been opened since then, and to do so would require authorization from librarian for a shutdown. Scribe had refrained, despite his curiosity to see inside, as the act of making the request would be deemed heretical. He would be stripped of his access to the library, and perhaps parted from the skin on his back if the illiterates found out what he'd attempted. After a long moment, the flickering lines on the screen mercifully straightened, and he could once again see the wall of text clearly. He puffed out a breath and leant forwards over his sheafs of rough pulp copying paper. Shelf after shelf of the stuff lined every wall in the building. The life's work of a dozen scribes, catalogued for librarians' interpretation. Scribe quickly copied the last paragraphs on the screen onto the pages, and then reached for the scroll wheel to advance to the next document. Fossil fuel. He spoke the title aloud, and as he read on, Scribe felt his mouth hang open. He had found it, the document which explained it all, and it sickened him. Scribe quickly risked a glance around the big room, but Reader had not returned from his match yet, and he knew that if Frida relayed this knowledge to Librarian, then word would quickly spread, and the last town on the planet would erupt with violence once more. Or perhaps, thought Scribe, it might be even worse. What if they started trying to extract more, to repeat the history he had painstakingly copied out for them his entire adult life? What if they didn't care that humans had ruined the world, that there was no going back, no starting again? When the device from his pocket was flicked open, it revealed a wide prong of metal. Scribe carefully inserted the thumb drive and used the decaying mouse to drag the file from the computer and drop it in the waiting drive, leaving no trace. He held his breath as he withdrew the device, but the computer remained alive. Scribe didn't exhale until he had climbed out of the pool and fled the library, heading for the edge of the world. The water was the first sign of the edge. It lapped up the shore of the disused highway which stretched away below it, leading to a world which no longer existed. Each day the tide filled up ancient cracks in the asphalt, dredging up syrupy oil stains and creeping ever nearer to the town. Scribe walked along the crumbling shore and scrambled up a bank at the side of the road. On his ascent, he passed a fallen, rusted, unreadable sign which had somehow been missed by the scrap metallers, the paint having long since flaked off. A steep incline littered with red boulders led him, finally, to the view from the edge. The dark indigo of the sea stretched endlessly away from him. Slivers of buildings that had once scraped the sky in downtown Denver poked above the waves in the distance. Scribe knew from his holy task that there had been other cities once, some much larger than this. He wondered if their buildings still rose above the waves too. Scribe snapped the drive in half and tossed the pieces into the waiting sea.
As an IT person, that gave me the fear.
Yeah?
Like, just imagining the uptime digits on that machine and how poorly it would be performing after that amount of time. It actually freaked me out a little bit.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, really cool concept.
You like
really
it?
cool concept.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the little drip feeding of what has happened to the world, and
Yeah.
Obviously the big reveal being why it's happened to the world.
Mm.
There's something unbelievably bleak about it.
It's pretty bleak, yeah.
But the football thread in it, this kind of like even the last dregs of humanity will find fun in something that's like, imagine the revelation of having something seemingly simple to us as football brought back. That's a cool thing.
And how bleak it would be for the world to have forgotten something like that.
Yeah.
Like if that means that adults went through a whole period where they never taught their children how to do it because there was no time for play.
Yeah.
Like nothing. Yes, it's on a first draft. That story was potentially the worst thing I've ever written.
Oh, fuck.
Because there was just so much granularity in the way that I had him using the computer.
Yeah.
And because using an old computer is extremely frustrating, that version of the story was extremely frustrating because it was just waiting for things to happen and like
just watching the sand timers flip over and stuff. Yeah.
No, I didn't go quite that far, but it was just sort of like every little thing was like, can I do this? Because it's a holy, for them it's sanctified. So something as simple as using the mouse was like somebody else's job. Like his job was just to read what's on the page and write it out.
Yeah.
But obviously I've done away with quite a lot of that, and I think I've moved things around to give it some tension and a bit of narrative to it.
I really liked the titles instead of names.
Yes.
So librarian and reader and scribe and like honorifics.
Yeah, taking away like signifiers and prepositions and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's it paints. I mean, the whole religious aspect of it paints a very bleak picture. Bleak again, but the right at the start you say the computer's altar, and it sets a tone of this, but it could be, especially by saying the fall of 95. It could be 2095. It could be 3095. It could be anywhere in that gap. And it makes it almost feels like a pressure cooker where you can, as it's revealing what the mistakes were that were made, it's like, how old is this machine?
Yeah.
And therefore, how much life could it possibly have left? Because things go, fans break, things stop working. What's going to, like, even cable degradation, like, those solar panels aren't going to work forever.
So I looked up how long USB sticks last. And do you care to take a guess?
But, like, until they just burn out.
Like, the max life expectancy.
12 years?
So, according to the article that I read, they can last between 10 and 100.
Oh, no, I don't like that.
Uh-huh.
I don't like that. That's bad knowledge.
It's interesting, isn't it? So, we don't know... I mean, we know that it must have been maximum 100 years, because that USB stick works.
Yeah.
But so I think I'm roughly putting it, like, somewhere in the mid-2100s.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit later than that. You know, it could be like 2210 or something, and the 95 was 2195. But it's not particularly far in the future. Like clearly we've not in this world we haven't advanced beyond simple solar panels.
Yeah.
In terms of like renewable technology.
Yeah, we're not splitting hydrogen for energy.
There's no fusion reactors or anything like that. It's just the sort of the bleakest interpretation of our future, which is if we continue this reliance on fossil fuels and petrochemical stuff. Like this is a potential future for humanity.
All right, Scribe, easy on.
I know, right? Right.
With my bad eyes, they're not gonna have me in there.
His like central act of like destroying knowledge.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Because it's obviously posited as he's making an executive decision to stop this knowledge from reaching what's left of humanity. Because most of them are illiterate, most of them have forgotten everything anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it does imply. I like the idea, this implication that there'll be someone called like Speaker, who then reads out what the scribe has written to share the knowledge with the people.
So I think that works with like the scribe is the one that takes it down, and they're typically younger because they've got better eyes and all the rest of it. And they've also got to have fast hand speed for copying out to a high degree of clarity and accuracy. And then you've got reader who reads the things that scribe has copied and potentially like catalogues it and puts it out. And then librarian, so like the Pope of this library, is the one who uses that library to it sort of interprets the library, and then speaks it. So it's like having the word of God, isn't it? Like popes claiming that they can.
Did you
talk
have
to God.
a fixed idea of what the thing he was reading and copying from was?
Yeah, so I think it's probably some sort of like very
like a digital Encyclopedia Britannica or something.
That kind of thing, yeah. But like maybe potentially it's because if they got a bit further into the future before the fall, if that makes sense. It could well be like Wikipedia backup articles or something like that. My
brain said Wikipedia, and I got lost for a little bit in the thought of. Do you remember, Ben may remember this happening previously. I once sent you some links to the breakfast cereal mascot wiki, and people have like added stuff like the honey Cheerio bee committing hate crimes, and so I like. Anyone can edit Wikipedia, so there's a chance that these people are learning a false history.
Yes, very, very likely. Yeah. That's it. I mean, potentially, I was aiming for 1,000 words with this one, and it's 1038 at the moment.
Oh, you failed then, didn't you?
I did fail. Yeah, it's
fundamentally you fucked up then.
Hey, it's still inside our brackets. I was trying to create like. Do world building, do narrative, do tension, do characterization inside 1,000 words, and it was really hard. I don't know whether I put too much pressure on myself, but when I was dealing with the first draft, and I've never felt like this before about my own work. I had a moment where I quite literally put my head in my hands because I was like, "This is just shit," and I couldn't look at it for the rest of that day because I was just. I need to step away. I need to walk away. And I tell you what, the next day I sat down, immediately started fixing it. At least, it's for other people to judge whether this is any good. But for me, this is a massive improvement on where it was. And I don't think I've ever taken a first draft and changed it to such a degree as I have with this one.
It is amazing what, even like the next day is not that long, but that little bit of distance. Now, we've had authors on before who said, if you write a book, put it in a drawer for 3 months, 6 months, and then read it.
And come back, yeah.
Because you need to read it with that bit of distance. And I think, it's on a smaller scale, so maybe the time frame works, but it's interesting to know that going away for a night, sleeping on it, lets you reset to the point where you can go, okay, let's do that again. Because I think I would probably in that situation get quite caught up on what I'd already written.
Yeah.
I do struggle with deleting stuff. And yeah, I think it's genuinely impressive that you're able to then go, no, I need to fix this, and can then apply what you know about story writing and storytelling to pull it in the right direction.
I appreciate that. I mean, as I say, it's for other people to judge whether it's any good. But
answers on the back of the postcard.
Yeah, finding it in the edit is something that it has been a theme with the authors that we've had on in recent months. So I feel like it's quite fitting that for a solo episode where it's just the two of us, I actually did have to apply some of that knowledge. Yeah. And it was useful to me to know that other people have completely dismissed their first drafts of things in order to then work on it at a later date when I was doing it, because I actually felt completely defeated by this.
Yeah.
Again, as I was saying earlier, in a way that I haven't felt before. And change can be difficult and painful sometimes, but I feel like I've proven to myself how my editing brain works.
Yeah.
Which is something that I was trying to find for a very long time. Having long since found how my storytelling brain works, but we know that a first or even a second draft of something just isn't enough for any kind of professional application of a written story, whether it's a flash fiction, short story, novella, novel.
I can imagine it's where a lot of people fall down as well, because it's hard work to put words out.
It is.
And that's nothing compared to then smashing those words to pieces and putting new words down.
Yeah. So yeah, if you write a novel and it's 120,000 words or something like that, in the edit, bear in mind you're probably going to have at least 4, maybe, and we've had people on the podcast that have been like 17 edits on their novels, like full edits. You're rewriting and rewriting 1 million words.
Yeah.
That's a totally different task from just putting out the skeleton first draft. It can be a pretty terrifying concept to know that, because I like the central premise of this story.
Yeah.
Even when I hated this story, I liked the central premise of it. And that got me to come back and actually be willing to work on it. So it was positive overall, but actually I felt at times during it, the worst that I've ever felt about writing. So
to cap it off, though, I will, however, say I'm really glad that the concept of glory supporters made it through.
Oh
to the future with Reader.
So I was thinking about that. Like it's like an immature way to approach the sport, isn't it? Because they don't know that you should just support your team, whether they win or lose. You support your team. So they're just like just fair weathering all over the place. I would have potentially liked some more words so that we could meet Reader. I feel like he would have been an interesting lens to look at the society through, because
he's got a like the bursar from
like a middle manager, kind of like bureaucrat middleman, and that fear that you get as a low-level worker when those people are about compared to when they're not about, because they just get in the way. Like, I'm fairly sure everyone can empathise with that when you've had a manager or a line manager who just gets in the way of the things that you're doing. I had one once that was that just was the worst micromanager, to the point where everything took 3 times as long for no reason. And that was the first time, I think, this was a while ago, that was the first time that I really clocked that very few people know what they're doing in a professional context.
Oh god, no.
And that's terrifying to me. Like, you imagine like these big science labs and stuff where people are doing like theoretical physics and all this shit, and some of those people don't know what they're doing. like theoretically, just completely positing that. But
Started when I was 14 as a test tube scrubber, and look at me now,
look at me now.
Flipping the big switch.
So, however, I'm interested if you got any feedback on like how to improve that story. Bits to cut.
I don't think it's cuts. I don't think you can take anything away from that, really, because it is foundationally really strong. I wouldn't expand much more on what's happened with the planet. I think you've made a good use of our contemporary knowledge of what fossil fuels are doing environmentally to let that tell that bit of the story for you. It would be interesting to see, not like you say the actual machinations of using the machine and the slow, but what life outside of the library looks like.
Yeah.
For specifically for someone like Scribe, who is inside this religious power structure, but with no power of their own. Like, are they revered outside of the library, or do they have to be like protected? Are they reviled by the illiterates? Like, it'd be interesting to.
I could go into that. I think for me, I feel like he's inside like a monastery, basically.
Yeah.
So I think he lives a very private, secluded life inside the library. And then I think it's librarian that's the go-between, or potentially readers stepping up to that if he's going to these football matches.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I could see that. I just don't have many more words to do it in, and I'm not sure what else I would cut in order to put that in.
I mean, if you wanted to do world building and cut something, it would probably end up having to be the football.
Yeah.
But that is setting up that they're in FO and that's that he's gonna hit something soon. So it's a trade-off. I think in terms of short story, it's where it needs to be in terms of what you are talking about. Obviously,
well, flash fiction at the moment, yeah.
With everything we do, there's always a way we could make it better.
Yeah.
Everything. It's just the nature of the beast. But I think if you wanted to tell this story in a way that made it more impactful or meaningful, you'd have to extend it out. You'd have to triple, quadruple the word count before you start getting to.
It's interesting that, isn't it?
To a message.
Knowing what stories, because I wouldn't say that I can still even after all these episodes, reliably know what concepts are going to suit short story and what concepts are going to suit flash fiction.
It's really common, for me at least, to feel like, oh yeah, this is a short story, and then it starts gathering momentum.
Yeah. And
you look down and you've got 130 words left to use, and you're like, I haven't
even begun.
I haven't started the story.
Yeah.
It's ready to fire now.
Do you sometimes find though you massively overshoot the word limit that we impose, and then realise that some of those words were you trying to explain the story to yourself?
Yeah, like
rather than
finding its feet.
Yeah.
But I don't need to see Usain Bolt stepping onto his feet for the first time. I need to see him run.
I want to see him run. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I think knowing what is that, because it's not wasted words, because you've got somewhere with it.
Well, yeah, you've used them for something, but
they still need to be cut.
Yeah.
So potentially there is some of that. Maybe I could look a bit deeper into this and see what I can cut out of this. But anyway, that was good feedback. Thank you.
I'd be pleased with it. I think it's a good story, which is all we can ask, really.
Good.
It's a cool idea.
Right. Okay. What have you got for me?
Oh no. The Edge. It had not been long ago that Harvin had been taking his meals at his mother's teat. Now, the comfort of that bosom seemed to be little more than a tale of fancy, incapable of measure against the reality that beset him on all sides. "Lance, boy, you're fucking deaf!" The voice of Sir Maythorne dragged him back to the mud and gore of his immediate surroundings. Harvin clutched at the threads of remembered familial comfort and felt them drift to oblivion. He had a job to do, did he not? "My fucking Lance, lad! You're so dense you should have us both killed!" Harvin spent no time nor effort on a spoken response. Instead, he allowed his gaze to focus in upon the lance his hands were gripping. The business end was still driven half through a fallen nag, its rider some time since dispatched. Again, the boy heaved against it, as he had before his mind had, in search of the sanctity of sanity, drifted home. It was stuck firm. His arms, not 10 years made, had scant strength to pull the implement of destruction from its gore cocoon. This was no barrel to be trundled around a training yard. The lance alone, its wound iron so dark with spent blood that it seemed black, was a challenging weight for the child to bear. He knew then that he was undone. "I cannot retrieve it, sir." He spoke the truth easily, as he had been instructed to at the end of a punishing hand. The knight spat. Mud and viscera stained the wad of phlegm a sickly brown. Harvin did not know whose crimson life it was that had splattered noisily against a staved helmet, but it was better out of his master, he thought. "Useless," the knight muttered. His visor still raised, he fixed eyes on the seemingly endless tide of fur-clad warriors regrouping some distance away. "A boy is not what I need. I need 24 men in plate mail on fine horses. And I also need a fucking lance!" His rage boiled over as he spoke, eventually exploding as he fixed eyes upon Harvin, struggling still with the embedded weapon. The bellow had brought with it more of the dark blood. So it was the knight's. Selfishly, Harvin rued that this meant he would never be a knight. If the old man was dead, then who would anoint him? Sir Maythorn ran a gauntleted hand over his lips and inspected the smear. "I'm done for. You hear me, boy? Fucking done for, lance or no lance." The knight tugged gently at the reins. His destrier Farvel was becoming restless. The mount was bred for war, and seemed in no way displeased with the stench of shit and burst men that surrounded it. Instead, it champed and pulled, eager to return to the fray. So like its master, Harvin thought. "This cannot be so, sir." The boy spoke because it seemed to him it was his time to do so. The old knight wanted to be heard, and it fell upon him to do the hearing. "It is so, boy." The knight looked back at Harvin, tearing his gaze away from the enemy forces. The intensity of the look struck the lad, harder than the punishing slaps of his life's adults ever had. With the intensity, all else seemed to fade. The cries of the half-dead, the brays of broken horses, even the deep commanding tones of the other commanders, trying to force their levied peasants into rudimentary formations before the hillmen could have at them again, seemed to fade into nothing. For the first time since their meeting, Harvin did not see a metal suit with a coin purse. He saw an old man. "Where is young Edmure?" "He is dead, sir." The other boy, some 14 years of age, had taken a wild man's hammer to the back of his head. Harvin recalled the way his eyes had bulged and his tongue had lolled like an aging hound. It could not have been more than a heartbeat, but he could swear he'd seen the boy's head swell before it poured all that was Edmure down the front of the lad. They had been close to friends, in their way. Harvin wished he had the time to mourn. "Dead. Shame." The knight's eyes drifted again from Harvin's. This time they seemed to pierce the sky, the intensity different, somehow fiercer even than before. "Is this what you wanted, you treacherous bastards? Is this what service to a god means? A life of purity, to die in farmer's land turned midden?" The knight's cheeks, barely visible between the visor's chin and raised faceplate, shone pale lines. The tears had streaked away some of the filth of a day's killing. Harvin thought he ought to speak, but he did not know what the answers were to any of those questions. In truth, it frightened him to hear the old knight question the Almighty so. It was not idly one transgressed against the god of steel, even with words. "How old are you, boy?" The knight had not turned his eyes from the heavens. I have had 9 years, sir, by my best reckoning, Harvin answered quickly. He knew only by the festivals he'd seen traipse through his town. He remembered 6 days of steel, and reckoned there must have been more before he could remember. 9. So young. The knight looked down at him. Now the steel of their shared deity seemed to be in the eye of the knight. My right arm's gone, boy. Can't feel my dratted fingers. Get around here and unbuckle the shield off my left. Harvin did as he was told. The bellowing chorus of the enemy army was lifting again. He swore he could smell the sickly sweet berries that were crushing to daub in strange markings on their bodies. It made his fingers clumsy, and he felt the shield slip, thudding point down into the mud. The sigil upon it, a roaring cat, seemed to accuse him with its glare. You dropped me, it said. You foolish boy. Very good. The knight's voice seemed far away now, as the sound of coming death built. You take that with you, boy. Back to my keep. Tell my wife I'm frightfully sorry. Harvin nodded, dumbly. Now, come round here, boy. Harvin squelched behind the knight quick as he could, ever careful not to take a hoof and fail in his task. The knight gestured to the ground. Get that blade down there, boy. A long one. That's it. The knight nodded reassuringly as Harvin struggled to lift an enormous sword from the ground. It seemed impossibly large to him. With some effort, he lifted it handle first to the knight. In his gauntlet, it looked right. Not too long, just as it ought. The knight leaned slightly, lowering the hand clutching the sword to the boy. Now, boy, see this pin here, by my thumb? Harvin nodded, still struck mute by fear and confusion. You take your eating knife, boy. You jam it through that there. Harvin was horrified. His hesitation could not have lasted more than a breath before the knight spoke again. Blast it, boy, do it now. That's an order. Harvin took the sleek knife from his belt. His one piece of steel. He dreamt of wearing the whole suit in service to his god. Now he was spending his world's share in it. He placed the tip through the loop and, with a nod from the knight, drove it home. The old man screamed through his teeth, causing the horse to worry a little. Through skill alone, he was not unhorsed. The knight tested his hand. As he had planned it, it was wedged shut. Blood seeped from the unconventional bolt, but the sword hand held true. You be sure to pass those words to my wife, Harvin. The boy was surprised to hear his name from the knight, and knew it was their final goodbye. So Maythorn turned the horse with his knees and bellowed a war cry. It was taken up on all sides, and a terrible blasting of horns came. Harvin grabbed at the planted shield as the space around him became a cacophonous maelstrom. It came free, though with what sound he would never know. He dared a glance back as he began to flee the field of battle. He saw his master clash with the enemy, and turned away before he could see him ended. He would remember him always as that hero charging the edge of the precipice, and never the old man who'd already begun to fall.
Well, that's for me.
That was definitely for you,
Some-
that one.
some night stuff. I really enjoyed it. It was it went like kind of like David Gemmell at one point. Do you know like Sparhawk? You know that kind of like mythologized knight in a fantasy setting. I liked the stuff about the God of Steel and the Days of Steel. I liked all that a lot. I reckon if I was to give you like a note here, I think you have a way with words where when you need to express something that's vile, you do it very in a not flowery but very exuberant language. And I feel like that led to that story being tonally quite mixed.
Okay.
So you had a moment where you mentioned that the lance is stuck in the horse and it's in a gore cocoon.
Yeah.
And that's one of those descriptives where it's like, if everything's like that, it works.
Yeah.
But in the next paragraph, you said, the stench of shit and burst men.
Yeah.
Which is a very different way to look at that scenario. That's a very grimdark bit of description. And for myself, I loved the burst men one because it's simple words that have a horrible impact.
Yeah.
Whereas gore cocoon is potentially quite...
Yeah, no, yeah. I see
flowery. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like potentially you could go through that and cut out quite a lot of the extra added description.
Like brutalise it.
And just brutalise it. And I think you'd end up with quite a different story in the end. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I like this concept of of squires having to actually help their knights on a battlefield.
Yeah.
Because it's ridiculous. Like kids scrambling around, and you'd expect it on a normal battlefield potentially. If it's like a medieval Europeans thing, maybe the adults wouldn't swing at the kids.
Yeah.
But if they're fighting woe-daubed hillmen, then those squires are in danger. They're combatants, aren't they, at that point? Yeah. This idea of him not being able to get the lance out of the horse, I like that a lot. I wonder whether, because the knife that he owns becomes very important later on in the story, it might be nice to put that earlier in, mention it earlier in the story. Because, if he's desperately trying to get this lance out, he could be trying to cut it loose, but there's just so much flesh.
So much horse.
It's not working. It's too small a knife. It's not big enough for the task.
Yeah.
But then later on, it is big enough for a different kind of task.
Yeah.
I liked it. I think it was fun. I think it had, it had Gemmel, it had Game of Thrones, it had historical fiction happening.
I think if I was going to write it again, because I hit the word count.
Right.
Just over the 1500. And I think I would give myself more time to talk. I wouldn't expand on the whole pantheon, but this idea of the god of steel, of knights revering this god because everything they do is based around the metal that they wear.
Yeah.
They wear and that they carry. So you have to worship that god because in theory they're the one keeping you
I like that.
Up and dangerous.
You've also got an expanded mythos of are the priests of this religion the smiths?
That's cool. I like that immediately.
Yeah. I think it's really good. I also think that I enjoyed listening to it, but I think there's potentially quite an easy bit of work to be done on it to bring it to where it could go. I think.
Feel that?
Because at the start there is quite a lot of those potentially highfalutin descriptions, if we want to put it that way, and they sort of drop off towards the end. I feel like it gets going about a paragraph or two in.
Yeah.
Because and the other note, actually, I'm just going to keep giving you notes here. Apparently,
I love it.
Is you could show rather than tell the boy his age and his inability.
Yeah.
More, I think, because at the moment you're doing both because he's struggling with the lance. It's clear that he's not big enough to do it and all the rest of it. And then later on in the story, he actually gets asked his age. So I don't think we need the stuff about his age at the start because that's going to become relevant later on. Okay. So I think if that hit the word limit, I think you're going to be able to take 300-400 words out of that.
Yeah.
And then without doing anything to the story, and then you can reapply those words into world building and more shit like that.
That's good feedback, man.
Yeah, do you like that?
Yeah, I do.
Cool. And then it was an interesting response to the prompt. I felt like the edge. I did sort of get to the end, and I wasn't 100% sure what the edge was in your story.
So originally it was the sword,
right?
It was someone forced to use a sword that was someone else's, and that I think that got lost quite a lot in the writing. Yeah. But that is sometimes the nature of the prompt, isn't it?
You could have the squire trying to find he could be find me a sword with an edge, boy, and he's picking up a sword, but it's snapped off at the hill, or it's been notched and dulled by all the metal that's been hit and stuff. But then he finds one that actually has a good edge to it.
A blessing from the god of steel. Yeah.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah.
Fucking A. But the meat and potatoes of that story very fun. It's an interesting interpretation of those more kind of like low fantasy battle epics.
Yeah.
And I think also it's an identifiable continuation of the thread that you've been on recently, where you're applying religious aspects to different genres, because you've done it to cyberpunk.
It's true.
And you've done it to like real world horror fiction as well, I think, recently. With some like demonic.
Yeah.
I think was it Split?
Oh yeah.
That had a bit of that going on. So it's interesting. Why do you think you're experimenting with like religious themes?
I don't know. I think with a lot of it, especially with religious stuff, I feel like there are unplumbed depths of potential great storytelling that things like the modern Christian modality have prevented. Because, like, at this point, scrap the Bible, write a new one with what we know now about
the Bible
storytelling.
The Bible 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Imagine how lit it would be, though. Like, we're so much better at telling stories. Like, we don't need... And then Michael begot Joseph, and Joseph begot Michael, and then Michael begot Jebediah. Okay, cut that bit out. That's wasting your word count. Let's get something in here about a dragon.
Yeah, they're finding the story in the writing there, aren't they? It needs an editor.
Although the Bible does do a thing you like in fantasy novels, is that it switches perspective.
It does.
Narrator.
Yeah, I like that. That's always good.
Even though they all repeat the same stories, so it's less good.
Constantly sending fucking letters to each other. But the idea of applying religion and religious structure to any genre is quite interesting, I think, because you're essentially playing with... Because I've done it in mine as well. Like that's the shared thing of this episode, I think. What you're essentially doing is observing the human inclination to garner power over other humans, no matter what the situation is, or what the context is, or what the world is. And it's sort of like you can like draw a line in the sand and just go, that's as far as you get to control things. Like, this is anything beyond here is sacred. It's religious. You can't touch. Like, this is we're gonna define your whole existence by the way we've interpreted the world.
I think that even as I was writing it, I was like, Are the gods real? Are they? Because in some settings like this, they might even show up.
Yeah.
But I thought, it's more interesting if it's just a night superstition that over decades, centuries, whatever, has kind of escalated into religion. Because that kind of thing I'm fascinated by.
Yeah, the concept of a knight where you have someone who's trained in warfare and the ability to use multiple weapons. You put them in a tank, like, because they're on a horse that also wears armor. They're going to dominate. They're going to control their surroundings.
And I think it is, especially with stuff like that, people need someone to thank when it goes well and blame when it goes wrong.
Yeah,
because they're incapable of looking in and doing it to themselves.
Yes, yeah.
So having him, hundreds of battlefields before this say, it is through the grace of the God of Steel that I still stand. But on this one being, you treacherous bastard, you've done this to me. I think that's... And we got to see the two ends of it here. That kind of like state mandated doctrine versus personal faith.
Yeah, it's dogma, isn't it?
Yeah, it's...
this idea of needing something to blame.
Yeah.
It also implies a world where there isn't enough time or space for that self-reflection.
Yeah.
Which is, it's pretty scary. It feels very Dark Ages. It's sort of, there's no culture happening here. It's just war.
We're just murdering each other.
Just killing the fuck out of each other. And fundamentally, war is insanely stupid. Like, from a human perspective, from humanity, any border skirmish, any nuclear war, any nightly charge against woad warriors, it's always idiotic.
It's so wasteful.
It's incredibly wasteful.
And it's, I think the thing that's fascinating about it is it's generally two places or groups or whatever sending their best to die.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
The classic example of that is Cressy during the 100 Years' War. I say classic, I mean from a British perspective, it's a classic example because a whole generation of French nobility died on that field for no real reason. Like they had the upper hand, they were chasing an inferior sized army that was out of supplies and in a foreign land. But it's where they learnt the power of the longbow, basically.
Yeah.
There have been some recent revisions to the way that battle actually went. Because you know, there's this classic tale of the Black Prince sort of winning his spurs.
Yeah.
There's been some recent revisions, and I can't remember the name of the historian. It might even be Tom Shippey, actually, who essentially posits that the prince was out of position, and potentially got people killed doing that act, which then has been narrativized and sort of, the future King of England won his spurs on this battle. It's like, but he, in the same way that
at the cost of what?
Yeah, exactly. It's the same way that Churchill learned his lesson at Gallipoli. Like you need to sustain a loss, do something wrong before you can actually learn from it.
It's most great because Washington was the same.
Washington had a very similar.
Led a whole squadron of men into an ambush and got them all killed. And
so what this tells us from a historical perspective is that people that learn from their mistakes go on to do great things.
Yeah.
And what's happening in your story is that this is an entire culture geared around not learning from your mistakes.
Yeah.
Not trying to look inside, blaming or praising a god for anything bad or good that happens to you, and just squashing other cultures under your iron-shod boot and the hooves of your horse. So I think yours is actually bleaker than mine.
It's always cheerful here, isn't it?
I think yours is somehow more fun but bleaker.
It's just war babes.
That's just war babes. I tell you what, it's we don't often get to record in person.
No,
because we don't live in the same place, despite what some of our guests have claimed, bed sits or otherwise. But it was a different experience listening to you in person, like read that story at me. I liked it. I think it adds something to it.
It's a lot more personal. I think reading next to each other. Yeah. Well, I had a good time.
I had a good time too. Those are two stories. Obviously, no guest this week.
No.
But I like it when we do these spacer episodes where it's just the two of us.
Yeah.
Because it feels like these are the opportunities to actually apply what we've been learning from all of our excellent guests.
Yeah.
Because we've had some absolute... Well, I mean, we've always had great people coming on, but it feels like for this year, most of Season 7, every single guest we've had has taught us something new, expanded our minds, and just been extremely impressive in both in what they've written for the podcast, but also how they think about the world in the interviews. And I don't know. I really like where we're at the moment. I feel like I'm growing creatively. I'm learning things from people, and I'm trying to apply it. I feel like your experimentation recently has been wonderful. Like the rhyming story that you did, for the previous prompt, and I would almost say this is like, because obviously you've written this with an audience in mind, and that in and of itself is actually something that some of our guests have been really keen to push, that you should always be writing with who you're writing for in mind. And I think I've sort of fallen foul of not doing that a few times.
You did your Orc one.
Yes.
That was so laser targeted at me.
Yeah.
And you absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
I think that's a skill you definitely have. You've
got to do it deliberately, and you've got to know who your audience is, I think.
I think a lot of that comes from being a good GM, though. Game master.
Game
for
master.
Those of you who wouldn't know. So yeah, because you're good at finding the vibe when we're role playing and finding I think this is the story the guys need right now.
Yeah.
I think you're very good at applying that skill.
Well, that's very kind, and I like that about that aspect of storytelling. But I mean, this is potentially a good thing to bring up on mic actually before we close out this episode. But I, for the last 6 months or so, I've been running a fairly intensive tabletop role playing campaign.
Yes, you have.
And I have barely worked on my novel at all in that 6 months, just because it hasn't even occurred to me to want to do it.
Yeah.
And some of that might be, what our guests have said about put it in a drawer and fuck it off for a bit and then come back to it, because you can get incredibly bored with your own story by just having to work on it for a repeated amount of times. But I stopped running.
Yeah.
I stopped doing this game mastering recently, and for the first week afterwards, I couldn't think of anything else. It was like I was jonesing to continue doing it. It was like I was physically addicted to telling stories to people in person.
Got any dice, man?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very much so. Like a critical addict.
Yeah.
Like and then the following week, I had an absolute explosion of interest in my novel. Just come straight up from the back of my head to the front of my brain. And I was writing reams and reams of notes about how I wanted to change stuff in the next edit. And I got really excited about it for the first time, really, this year.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of something that I heard in at the Worldcon that I went to when it was in London in 2010. So this is a fucking long time ago now. And one of the writers on a panel, she very eloquently explained that she loves game mastering, but can't game master while she's working on a novel. Yeah. And at the time, I thought, oh, that's an interesting take, but not relevant to me.
Turns out.
I mean, how many times in your life do you wish you could just go back and just say, no, actually listen when somebody tells you something. Yeah. Fucking learn from other people's mistakes. But anyway, I've learned the lesson now, and I'm excited about the novel again. So I'm hoping to have a finished draft of that by the end of the year, and maybe then we can start the interesting process of listening to the horrors of me getting rejections every time I send it out. Anyway.
Oh, I can't wait to have your misery on, mate.
Okay, well, have you got anything else to add?
Brush your teeth. Always wipe front to back, and look both ways before you cross the road.
There we go. That's the end. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?